because, you know, with all 8 of you, 7 of you, 7. Teacher, can't add, nice, isn't it? Teaching our young people. So I guess I should start off with a little bit of an introduction, because I probably need to do that here, because I'm new to this space, and it's really fantastic to come and speak to all 7 of you, because I think it's really nice to make a connection between education and the things that you guys are making and how that might play out in a space where people are actually using the things that you bring to our kind of community. And in my role as a teacher, I get to work with students that are 4 years old all the way through to higher ed. So I've got a really broad spectrum of people that I work with in a consulting role, as well as my own classroom, which is at St Hilda's on the Gold Coast. So I'm a bit of a nerd, and I'm always interested in particular at looking at the trends, the things that are happening in the future. But with education, things that are happening now have sort of this interesting tension between future-driven education and what our students need now is kind of where teachers are always looking. So it's been a big year, and things seem to be getting bigger and smaller all the time for us in ed. But if we stop thinking as much about devices and applications and more about learning, I think in general we're on the right track. So today, out of everything that I'm going to tell you, I'm going to talk about that word learning a lot. So it's going to transcend the technology kind of spiel, and it's going to really be about things bigger than hardware and software, because what I live and breathe is supporting students. Now, as I said, I am a real teacher. I think that's important to say from the get-go, because when I talk to teachers about education, that comforts them. When I talk to them about technology, they're comforted by the fact that I actually do stand in front of actual, real little people. There's sometimes a bit of a disconnect between our worlds. And I'm finding more and more that people who come to the education space are doing a really heavy sell on the education market. And even that term market has, I guess, a lot of pressure points within it in a space where you're talking about young children. So, you know, in the workshops that I do, in terms of selling apps and really, I guess, giving educators opportunities to engage with products and practices that will work for them, I'm constantly trying to connect teachers to their roots, to the idea that developers have wonderful things that they can offer in terms of perspectives, but that their perspectives will, of course, always be valued as well. And so it's a conversation, I guess, rather than one-way traffic. And that's probably what it's going to be today too. So this is not going to be one-way traffic from me if you don't want it to be. I can stand here and bang on about kids all day long. Believe me, I love those little people. But it's probably going to be much more fun if you laugh along with the stupid memes that I've got for you, and you really kind of construct your understanding along the way. So feel free to cringe and shout out and interrupt. It's all good, okay? As long as you put your hand up. Yeah, see, the jokes won't get any better. I hope you understand that. I really do. This whole slide deck is just scratched up with memes. I've been really kind of conscious of the idea that it's 3 o'clock on a Friday, and you guys are doing really well to be here and to have your brain intact at this point. So there are some really hard bits of data that underpin what I've got for you here. And if you'd like the attributions and the research notes for those, I'm happy to give them to you if you send me an email. And we'll talk about that at the end. But really, there's not a test at the end of this, it's about tools. So it's the thought-provoking stuff that we're really interested in today, and we're going to start with teachers. Because I think it's really important to know who's actually teaching our kids so that you know where you can connect and where you might find some really informative kind of points of contact. So I guess I want to start with a negative and then try and leave that behind, because I'm generally a very positive, can-do kind of person. The sad thing is, in teaching, we have more teachers exiting the profession who have spent less time actually doing the job than they did training for the job. I'll say that again. We have, at the end of 5 years, if you can imagine this, more than 47% attrition in our role. And that's a really, really scary thing. The fact that people can actually train for a job that they then spend less time doing than they did training for is a scary thing. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons for that. Data and accountability are 2 of the big ones. And the third is the idea that technology is putting a lot of pressure on our teachers. And I'm just going to keep saying the term technology, but it's incorporating all of those things like meaningful ways of using devices, constructing new curriculums that really leverage the devices that we have access to, and I guess training facilities, schools and communities really trying to analyse what the benefits are for the students and being responsive to those sorts of roles. As I said, I'm usually a very positive person because I'm on the side of students, and that's where our teaching staff are too. They don't come to the profession for the money. Let's be real about that. There are opportunities elsewhere for a lot of these very talented people that would be quite different. But what they do is get really excited about what they can provide our kids. And it doesn't mean that they don't see that there's challenges when they enter the profession, but often they're really not aware of what they might be and how that's going to work. So when it actually comes time to have those precious holidays that we do all really enjoy, we often find now that our teachers are trying to make up the time, and a lot of our professional development is actually being situated in the holidays, and bit by bit the holidays that we do have access to are actually being pulled back. It's interesting because there's a window of opportunity here for developers, because even though there are so many other tools that we have access to, again, the uptake in our classroom is very slow, and we haven't seen a lot of significant changes in education as far as I'm concerned. I mean, what you're looking at here is a classroom that's, you know, old and grey. Look at that kind of miserable kind of slide. Isn't that awful? But then this is something that's very much the reality of today too. And I don't know if you'll see many more smiling faces. There's a few, but essentially we're still sitting in rows looking at the sage on the stage out in front. And I guess you'll see what I'm saying. And kids, they've always been kids as well. I really feel like most of the time our kids have not changed despite the rhetoric and the advertising. I remember fist pumping when that video got rolled in. You know what I'm talking about, right? It was exciting when you saw that thing happening and you knew you didn't really have to do much work that period. And yet the hating on kids for using technology inappropriately or for opting out of stuff at the moment is quite outrageous, I believe. I'm on side of kids, I told you that, right? So let's talk about the ideal teacher for a moment as we sort of shape this conversation that we're going to have. Because there are some things that come naturally to really good teachers. They're usually people that have a calling to the profession, the burning desire to help little people. And care is definitely a word that I would use to describe people that choose to put themselves into situations where they're charged with, you know, beating the NAPLAN data and cleaning up wee and vomit on a daily basis. Sometimes I pick up devices and feel like I need another tetanus shot just for touching that thing, looking at what's on the screen. So it's a big job, right, where you're caring for people that are going through all kinds of life experiences, deaths in their family, and your supervisors are looking over the percentage improvement that your kids are having in your maths classroom. So some big challenges. I've got to say that despite people coming to the profession for the main reason being care, the understanding that teachers have when they walk into a classroom about all of the diversity that comes within that role is really late coming in the education process. So sometimes our teachers are only having an experience in the classroom in year 3 of their journey through university, which again means that it's really difficult to attract the right people. Once they're at year 3, the idea that they might pull out at that point, that's a really big thing when you've invested 3 years of your life to get to that point. So we've probably got to do better at actually getting people to understand when they sign up for this job what it means, and perhaps advertising and being an advocate for the fantastic opportunities that there are in education. Because I never imagined when I started teaching, and university technology for me was using email, and that was it, that I'd be travelling the world talking to, you know, teachers, administrators, community about large-scale deployments that are worth over $1 million. In a classroom teaching role, that was never something that I imagined was going to be possible. So let's have a look at what our learners might need, because this is where we start to hone in a little bit more on what it is that you guys might be able to provide for us. The 21st century learner is kind of a bit of terminology, a bit of jargon that we like to throw around at schools, because it helps us to unpack the things that are embedded in our curriculum, but perhaps the things that really need a bit of an explosion around them as well. We're all very familiar with the 3 Rs. We're really familiar, I guess, in this era of high-stakes testing, that there are certain things that are tangible that we know our students need. But some of the things that really represent what our employers want and what the future kind of marketplace for our little employees are going to demand really is better represented with some of the skills like is open to change. And that's a challenge for teachers when kind of building a curriculum. How do you actually support that and then measure the success of your programs? And one of the things that's sort of popping up quite obviously is that there's a very direct relationship between technology and, of course, the needs of the 21st century learner. It's a no-brainer to us in the room because we're sold on this, because we live it every day. Just by being here, you're a part of that journey. But different players in this game are at different points along that journey. So, some heavy stuff, right? So you need another meme. I deal with this kind of level of technology understanding, I guess, on a day-to-day basis, because our teaching community is diverse. And it's very easy to get frustrated at times. I know sometimes there's a smile on my face that may have a little edge to it. But the reality is, if you've missed one step along the way on this journey, it can be really, really difficult to get back on track because of the rate of change, the incredible rapid uptake that we kind of need to be on board with to keep on track. We have left a lot of people behind, and there are people in our profession who have really fantastic experience in a whole variety of areas outside of technology, but who didn't move into that space quickly enough and now find it a real struggle to bring much to the table when it comes to those 21st century skills we just had a look at. So we need to be able to learn new things as students, and we have a shared responsibility as teachers to do that too. And I think that for teachers, as it is perhaps for everybody, including developers, we need to know that it's okay if a very small person actually knows something more than us as a much bigger person. And partnership is key here. So less of me telling you you're doing it wrong, more of you being able to find out the right answers yourself, or even perhaps revelation that there are more than one solutions to a problem, or that maybe perspective is actually the key. So if it sounds utopian, we are chipping away at it, right? And you guys can help, because even though I get frustrated, there are lots of us who believe in this idea. So what do you really know about how ed tech is working in the classroom? What do you know about how we use apps and devices? And what do you know about the difference, this is super important, between entertaining kids and actually educating them, engaging them, giving them a voice, helping them to feel empowered? So to start that thinking process now, I want you to have a little bit of a think about the history of educational technology, because it's a weird one, right? There are stops and there are starts, but the main things that I think stand out for me, the idea that our first public education worldwide was only really available in 1651, that's a bit of a freak out for me. And in fact, the whole idea of that kind of educational structure, where kids sat in rows and were learning to actually kind of produce something at the end of their education, that hasn't really changed in all of that time. The goals of education are really not much different in terms of being able to read and to write and to add and subtract. The first modern pencil, this is important, came about in 1868, and you're talking about 1977 as the first PCs coming into the classroom. Australia actually had the very first one-to-one laptop program. Did you know that? Big deal, really big deal. And that was in 1979. So really quickly we moved from a 77, really early adopter kind of deal to trying to mainstream access for everybody in a classroom 2 years later. So that kind of rapid uptake, I think, is important to note, because if you look at where we are now, all these years later, we still don't bloody well have one-to-one access for kids in classrooms. And the idea of BYOD, or bring your own device, is still in a state of absolute tension, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But what you had in 89, if I fast forward another 10 years there for you, is a ratio of one computer between 18 students in only about 20% of schools worldwide, and we are still at that same ratio today. The world has got bigger, the access hasn't increased in the classroom when you look at K through to 12. So the ratios and who has it and what they have are completely different, and I can't show you graphs on that because they look like someone has just thrown up on a screen. They make no sense unless you do some serious data analysis, because of the different ways that economies have worked globally, because of the different pressures and products that have impacted on our schools. And so I guess what you're really looking at now when it all comes down to the data is that still only about 54% of students in classes that are grade 6 through to year 12 have daily access to technology as part of their curriculum. Okay, so that doesn't mean they don't have a device, they may have their own, but only about half of our students are getting access to technology-based curriculums each day. So to me, that's a big problem. You're thinking I'm right? No, you're just staring at me. Yeah, come on, get on board, right? So here we are. Technology has had a few problems along the way for us in schools. For a lot of teachers, the conceptualisation of technology as Google was something that we had to fight against. The idea that a computer would know more than a teacher was really, really frightening. For people who spent their life trying to, feel like they actually had knowledge to impart on children, this was a really big game changer. And I guess also understanding that for some students, the way that we'd always done it and the way that it was successful was not actually going to suit students was a challenge. Because the idea was, well, if I know how it can be done, you should get on board with it. That's something that's really changing now as we move to personalisation and individualisation, and you'll start to hear those words that really mesh with technology integration popping out. Now it's really all about mobile. This is the biggest single trend in education that's affected the way that we teach in the classroom. BYOD is happening as much as possible, so that concept of bringing your own device is really desirable in school structures where they can't afford to roll out one-to-one access for all of their students. It's a really nice thing to think that your kids can bring their own stuff and then your teachers can utilise it. But can you see some problems with that utopian idea, right? The kids who have access to things have the advantage. In whole different socioeconomic zones, you're going to find that some have advantages over others. And you're also going to find incredible, and we do find incredible stress on our teachers because they have to find ways to deliver the curriculum really meaningfully to people who have all manner of things, from a mobile phone to an iPad to a Chromebook to a $4,000 Mac. It's really, really tough stuff. I don't have my iPad today. I've broken my Mac and I don't have access. If we don't provide the things, these challenges become really, really problematic. So if we want to leverage the power of the device that our kids do have with them, then most of the time it's actually going to be through their mobile phone, because that's the one that they carry around with them all the time now. And we're finding that most of the time in state schools where we are not in the lowest of the socioeconomic bracket, all of the students have mobile phones, almost to the one, by the time they're 14 years old. It's highly unusual for kids in state school systems now that are over 14 years old not to have a mobile phone with them. So that's where we are, and it's probably no good arguing about whether that's a good or bad thing, because it is what it is, right? And so talking to teachers about how to use that rather than block the hell out of them is kind of an interesting proposition, because that was our natural way of thinking. And if you look at some of the classrooms that I've taught in Asia, they've got some really amazing kind of constructs for dealing with this. One of them is charging/phone jails, where the students walk into the room, the students all have a number and they put their mobile phone in their little pocket that corresponds with their number, and that's where it has to stay for the whole time that class is on. And kids being kids, don't you love them? They have fake phones that they put into those pockets so that they can have the burner sitting out there doing nothing. And of course, teachers being teachers realise that this is happening, and there's this marvellous thing where they actually ask them for the second one, or ring their numbers and spend ridiculous amounts of time at the start of the session actually checking to see that the phone is for reals. Whereupon, of course, the students buy another one, get a second line, and go to an incredible amount of effort just to be able to carry their mobile phone on them. It's fabulous. This is one of my favourite things ever. This is the cell block. This is a jail, essentially, for mobile phones, so that as students come into the classroom, they can put it into the cell block. And if you'd really like to make your own, it's on Pinterest, so you can create this beautiful thing for your own classroom. I love it. But so many teachers aren't like that. There's a lot of mythology about who behaves in which way and how that all plays out, and at the end of the day, we're really breaking through. Mobile technology is mainstreaming in classrooms, and thank God, it's been a long time. So, considering our curriculum is supposed to be responsive to the needs and behaviours of our students, it's only natural that our curriculum is starting to become designed to take advantage of these tools that our kids have. We've got a new curriculum coming in Australia, as you might be aware, but this is a very general model that you're seeing here on the screen that represents most curriculums, I would now suggest, across the world. The idea that all teachers are actually teachers of ICT, or information communication technology, is a pretty big deal. So your art teacher, your maths teacher, your science teacher, they are all charged with the responsibility of incorporating ICT into their classroom. Now, for some of us, we've been fist pumping about this because it brings us all into this, togetherness thing. Just like an art teacher would correct spelling on an essay, it makes sense to me that all teachers would be using technology in their curriculums. I can't think of a single subject area, and I've had people push back on me about HPE, and I've burned them about how fantastic digital technology can be in that space of physical exercise. But really it's taken a very long time for us to all hold hands and do this in terms of the curriculum. But it's still absolutely not happening in our schools. And again, I think that's a challenge and an opportunity for you guys, because in providing the right tools, the right access, the right conditions for our students to be creative across the curriculum, that's something that you can think about. This is another model that has a lot of currency in our world at the moment. This is the SAMR model that you're looking at. And if you look at the acronym, it's coming from substitution, augmentation, modification and redefinition. And what it's trying to do for teachers is really unpack the idea that if we substitute one tool for another, so something that wouldn't be considered technology with something that is, then we may be making no change in the learning outcome for the student. So for example, if I ask you to write an essay on a computer, and the task would have been exactly the same if you wrote it on paper, it may really be the exact same task. Perhaps if you're using spell check, then you're starting to take it to augmentation. So that tool, that spell checking, is for you really upping the standard of the product that you'd been able to produce. But again, perhaps not changing the learning, because if you don't understand or really take on board the corrections, then it might really be doing nothing in terms of that change state for the learning. The best place in classrooms at the moment, as far as this model is kind of championing, are in this top row, where we're looking at redefinition. That's where we're challenging teachers to use technology to bring things to the students that were possibly inconceivable. Opportunities for learning where they're doing things that could be done through no other analogue tool. We're starting to talk about things like socially working with other students in different countries across Skype, playing different games where they create real worlds around themselves where they can actually meet other students and talk about things within those environments. The idea is that the task is hard to create, and you may not want to do this all the time because the effort is pretty high in terms of level, but that the reward is great and that you're really leveraging technology for something that's meaningful. So this takes a lot to unpack with teachers because it sounds hard and it often is hard. And so the key in this space is training. And this is where it gets really difficult because quite often, even though you're dealing with deployments in hundreds of thousands of dollars for hardware and perhaps even for software, the spend on professional learning for teachers is very, very low. Often for teachers limited to 1 or 2 staff days at best in a year, even though the time that they would be spending with the students on technology or using technology is incrementally increasing. So it's an interesting thing. The teachers who are really embracing technology to their students, you might want to know a little bit about them because these are the people you might want to connect with. They're the people that research and buy technology to try out. And they usually do that with their own money, which is a really interesting thing. They're often guided by the things that they are already using or the things that their children are already using, which is a challenge and an asset both in itself because often they're early adopters of things. They bring their interest to the table with the students and that has a wonderful authenticity. But it's also probably going to mean that if you want teachers to try things out, you're going to have to try to hook them in, get them to want to use it themselves and possibly give it to them for free because they're not going to be able to buy it with their school budget. If you want to get them to see which tools work for their students, you're also probably going to have to give it to them for free because they certainly won't be able to buy 30 or 60 or 90 sets of whatever that tool is. Teachers are constantly facing budget restraints, but the bigger difficulty is not the cash. The bigger difficulty is that for teachers who apply to actually buy things, they have to show that it's going to make a measurable improvement in the outcomes for their teaching and learning. Now, how do you do that if you've never used something before? How do you do that if you've got something that you want to try out, something that may actually fail? And to be honest, a lot of times things fail. When you're moving from the cutting edge to the bleeding edge and back again in education, things get messy because we're talking about students. We're not talking about people who have time to waste and kids who have a minute to spare. The teachers that you probably want to collect with, they're probably also going to be looking at what their colleagues are using, and they're going to be doing that globally. In America, the number one way that teachers connect with other teachers that they previously haven't networked is through Twitter. Okay, in Australia, it's a different story. We really look at Facebook for interactions and closed LMSs that work within our school environments. But visiting conferences is starting to become a thing in education. That's really a new space, but it's developing all the time. So if you want to connect with one of these sorts of teachers, you're going to have to be looking in spaces that are a little bit outside of trying to get at them through their staff room mailboxes, as was the past. Now, when we look at why teachers will actually choose to use a particular tool, there's three reasons that they identify themselves. And you're looking at the idea that they can adapt it to produce a diverse learning experience for their students. So in other words, they want things that they can have personalised the learning for their students. In most classes now, in state school systems, you're looking at a huge variety of learning needs across that spectrum, and often a 4-year level stretch of abilities. So teachers have got real challenges when they try to meet the needs of that diverse population. So if the technology, the product, the app can suit a really diverse space, then you're probably onto something. Another thing that they're really looking at in their top 3 is that it boosts student motivation, or in other words, is engaging. And enhancing the material that's already being taught is a big factor that you'll want to connect with them on. So if they can see that it's actually going to bring something extra to the table for them outside of what they were previously able to do, you might get buy-in. 91% of your teachers have access to computers in their classroom, but those are still often old desktops. And that's a bit of a revelation to a lot of people. But when we see surveys about technology usage, you're often looking at really crumbling old Dells in the corner of the room, and there's usually 2 or 3 or 4 of them. At any given time, half of those are broken. That landscape is a very challenging one, as I said, and it's a reason why BYOD really appeals. Only 1 in 5 teachers feel that they have the right access to devices in their classes. So that's a huge challenge for us. That means that 80% of our students aren't being facilitated in the way that our teachers want them to be. Our tech leaders think a little bit differently. I'm sure you find that revelationary. I just make up words all the time like that because it just blows my mind that we have this big disconnect. 3 out of 4 schools in Australia are still purchasing devices for students, but at the same time, 64% of those same people have a clear vision for BYOD in the next 2 years. So if you let that process for a minute, that's a really interesting thing. So they're buying stuff now, but knowing that it's going to be a completely different landscape in their school within the next 2 years, or at least hoping for that BYOD structure in the next 2 years. Connectivity, though, now, even just over the last 18 months, has improved so much, with most school leaders now saying that their sort of rating system out of stars would be around a 4, 4.5 for connectivity. And what we're seeing is less and less IT staff being directed to those issues. So that's a really nice thing. 72% of administration say that training for staff is effective and adequate, but you can imagine that those thoughts are not echoed by teachers. Right, so in other words, almost 3/4 of admin think they're doing enough to support teachers. But the biggest priority, and I think this is really telling, the biggest priorities for next year for admin is number 1, staff, resourcing and upskilling. So there's a huge disconnect there with what administration says about their own staff. There's a whole lot of reasons why. So much of it is attached to government funding and support. So having a clear picture of what administration is actually thinking is really difficult at times. So the biggest priorities for next year, as I said, number 1, staffing, resourcing and skills. Number 2 is going to be bringing the required IT support and training to the team on site. And number 3 is device management. Okay, so there's probably not too many surprises there, but what might hurt someone's feeling in the room is that the lowest on the list of 20 priorities was security. So I think that's an interesting challenge for the future. Yeah, well, I know someone. So here's the little kind of status on what people are using and how that's playing out. 83% of classrooms are using web tools more than once a week. 62% are using mobile devices for learning. 59% are using digital games. This is a big mover. This has almost doubled in the last 2 years. 58% are using online educational resources, and 42%, again more than tripling this number, are using social media in their classrooms. This is opening up the students' world. And if you want to know more about all of these things, as I said, I was really reluctant to throw stats at you all over the screen today, but the New Media Consortium's Horizon report goes into depths about all of these trends and is the most reliable report in terms of the educational space. So that link will be there for you, but Google the heck out of that one. It comes straight up, Horizon Report for Education, and you'll see all of these different ideas coming forward. Here's a bit of a summary of what they tell us the landscape is going to look like in the next couple of years. Device agnostic approaches are going to be extremely important. Okay, we know that. This is the never-ending story. Again, stupid meme, this one probably the least relevant of my entire collection, but just checking you're still there with me, good. Big data is a huge deal because most teachers don't know how to use it and they're being asked to constantly now. Numbers in e-learning, for example, are becoming so large that processing the user-generated data using traditional methods is just about impossible. And yet stakeholders now in education are screaming for mobile analytics. They want deeper understanding of the learning process, and they want to be able to look at statistics as simple as who's completing what on time in a classroom, all the way up to kids' progress from prep through to year 12. So it's really, really difficult to think about the capacity there of our teaching staff, and it's a huge opportunity in the developer space there. The thing that we're really not seeing a lot of at the moment, but I'm sure that it'll be coming through soon, is the ability to compile comprehensive reports on learning across a whole variety of spectrums and sources. That's something we just don't have access to yet. So for example, if a student leaves a school, almost all of their data will stay at that previous school. There will be a NAPLAN report and a school report that will go with them. Very little other tracking will follow. Gamification, as I mentioned before, this has been a really big mover. So that concept of applying gaming mechanics and game design over the top of learning to really motivate has mainstreamed. And this, I think, is a really pleasing thing because engagement is something that we know is a powerful force in education. Tapping into the basic desires and needs of a user, focusing on their impulses. This revolves around that idea of status and achievement. Teachers didn't like gamification in general for a long time. They really felt that if something didn't look rigorous, feel rigorous, if it was too much fun, it couldn't possibly represent real learning. And we've moved past that now, so it's exciting. Here's some of the reasons why. If you want to know how the brain works, learners generally recall only about 10% of the spoken word. So today you're not going to get much out of my presentation. There's some visuals to help you, so you might go towards 20%. That's where we're talking sort of in that space of having visuals and the voice going as well. If I show you something using an action, we might get to 30%, but you're talking 90% retention when learners actually do the job themselves. And here's the thing with gamification in the classroom. The mind doesn't really know the difference between a simulation and reality. So if the students move through a virtual world and complete a task, the brain doesn't really know the difference between having done it in that virtual space or real life. And this is why visualization methods have been so popular in the sporting world. It's a proven thing. It's not some kind of hocus pocus deal that when you visualize success, you're more able to act on that kind of goal-orientated thing and make it happen. Interestingly too, 90% of users in any game, and there's been a really broad spectrum of things used in this particular research I'm referencing, 90% of users said that they found completing the tasks fun. And these tasks that they were given, some of them weren't that fun, but the concept of working through an online space and actually winning or losing and going through that iterative process seems to really suit the mindset of children. 60% did say when they were pushed in second level questioning that it was only fun sometimes. So I think that, of course, this tells us that implementation matters. So does personalisation. This is the tailoring of pedagogy, and we're being told that adjusting the pace or the level with our M-learning is really important, and that M-learning or mobile learning for us is going to be absolutely the dominant medium for offering support to our students through technology by next year. Okay, so that's a really, really big deal once again. So laptops, we're not considering those mobile learning anymore. It's about tablet devices. So essentially, if it connects to a keyboard and can't be disconnected from that keyboard, then that's the kind of device that we're going to be looking for in a classroom, because students can walk around with it, having access to the camera as a window into their world and as a vehicle for producing original content is absolutely key. And the keyboard itself is going to be a thing of the past in education, I think, much sooner than most people realise. We're starting to see in desktop computers in kindergartens that students absolutely struggle conceptually to understand how those desktops work. They're touching the screens, they're holding the box, they're literally trying to pick up something that weighs more than they do, because the idea that mobile technology, handheld technology, is ubiquitous and all-consuming means that desktops are now positioned as other to children. You might have noticed that if you've got young people, they're touching the heck out of the television screen. It's a constant frustration. So, last couple of things from the Horizon report. Your return on investment is very important. So when you're building things, being able to actually talk about how it's going to calculate the return on investment in data-supported stories of success is going to be crucial. There's a really increased drive to make sure that in the testing environments that we're dealing with, that practices and products actually connect to those goals of lifting student achievement. So good luck with that. Automation is something our teachers are asking for, so this is a little bit different to some of the other things that are coming out of the Horizon report. Creating content for teachers is often really time-consuming and tedious. When they're constantly needing to update what they're doing, automating the process of content creation could be something really, really useful. So we're starting to see things like quizzes and exercises and tests auto-generated from content, but I think we can get much better at doing that algorithmically, and that students need some control over that customization as well, so that they can really respond to their own level or skill set, and it's not all in the teacher's hands. The last couple of areas, AR, or augmented reality, and geo, you're really looking at things that when we link the sight and the experiential learning, we've got this lovely way of engaging with mobile devices. It just makes sense that you would take them into that next space, right? It feels like the next space, because you've got students who are able to go on excursions and respond to what they're seeing on site, and then to bring those products back to their school site is really, really important. And wearables connect to that too. We haven't seen anywhere near the adoption on that we were expecting. It's a much slower burn at this point. And interestingly, I mentioned health and physical education before. That's the single biggest area where we're seeing wearables utilised. So connections between science areas and health and human relations, or physical education, are the big move. And the reason for that is still the idea that we've got the health monitoring capacity in most of those. So we haven't really gone much further than that, but we know that even for connections with science, the students using their own bodies really brings an authenticity to that space. And social approaches, kind of using the idea that brainstorming, discussions, working collaboratives is something that's really old news. Everybody that's had a job for the last 20 years in general has already sort of discovered that they can use those different spaces to communicate. But in classrooms, the big drawback has been actually getting students IDs for things, working out how they can protect their identity, even how they can communicate with each other on shared devices or things that they don't own themselves. We're finding more and more that the virtual spaces that they can actually create bring a whole new level to this kind of idea, and Minecraft has been the big winner in this space. So students actually learning to build a coliseum together in 6 classrooms in a school in that virtual space, and connecting between science, maths, art, all of that sort of stuff. That's the big player in that kind of idea. Worst slide ever. You won't be able to read this, but just showing you that all of this information, as I said, is in the Horizon report, and it goes into a lot of detail. So that's all there for you, with the different ways that emerging technologies connect with those big overarching kind of thoughts. So as we start to track towards the end here, it's probably obvious that there's a lot going on in the classroom and a lot of change. And that means that a lot of support is required. So it's that idea that there's these challenges but opportunities at the same time. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the hacking that's going on in the classroom, because teachers have become really kind of interested in finding workarounds for things. And it's that bleeding edge versus cutting edge kind of tension that we see a lot of the time. So some of it does crack me up. I mean, I look at the cost of a charging station for instance, with iPads. Often those things aren't even budgeted in for when a deployment goes down. And you can see that teachers are finding ways to go to the $2 shop and to make something work for their kids. It's a beautiful kind of idea that, you know, we're DIYing that. Kids have been showing us the way with that kind of creativity, the way they leverage tools for a long, long time. But in terms of mobile devices, there's some useful tips here that we can sort of garner from the way that they do and teachers are hacking up their classrooms. It's important, I think, to know that in the educational development space, I don't see a lot of dialogue between child psychologists, teachers, people in the educational community, and product builders. It's a point of fascination to me that we just don't talk. Part of it is the disconnect between money and kids. No one likes the idea of selling to little people. There's a lot of discomfort around that. But I think that we need to know that we do need to talk to build the best products possible in support of teaching and learning. Sometimes in the educational space, we can't buy apps at all. Some schools will have free apps only for their mobile devices. Did you know that? That they just won't actually ever spend. So they'll purchase iPads or what have you, but they will not give teachers permission to actually purchase things to put on those iPads. So free apps become really important in that space. And on top of that, our free apps then often have ads built into the structure of the way that they work, and then they get banned because the ads are being pushed out to the students in the classroom. So the hack for that teachers have come up with is just turning off the Wi-Fi before they go into the app so that the ads don't pop up on the free app. So then everyone loses, because now you're giving apps to people that then aren't accessing the ads, which are paying for you to develop the apps and to monetize the whole process of bringing great creative tools to the classroom, and around we go. The best hack ever is that, you know, if you log on with your Apple ID to an iPad, for example, then you can drop the apps you've already paid for onto your student's device. And so we have teachers sitting up all night, logging out each one of their students' iPads, putting their Apple ID onto that iPad, downloading the 20 apps that they want their students to have for the term, are taking themselves out of the equation again by taking their Apple ID out and giving the student permission back. And you just think, on one level, it's simple genius, like to come up with this evil scheme, but it's not doing anybody any favours. And the fact that that's the environment that we're working within is pretty scary, really. So, yeah, we really need to talk more. Another thing I find is a barrier is the level of literacy required for a whole bunch of different apps. They might be geared towards students that are 5 and 6 years old, but the reading level is actually pitched at 9 and 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds. So education definitely needs to start talking a lot more to people that build. In most places, we're still seeing Facebook blocked. You'd be, 80% of schools would have Facebook blocked. Almost all of them have Snapchat banned. And we're still in a space where at least 50% of schools have mobile phones banned all the way up to year 10. But if you ask a 10-year-old how to download a free copy of Game of Thrones, they've got you covered. So it's pretty fun, right? And so the conversations probably for all of us need to start with our kids need, and they need more than just products, because I'm not just talking about piracy here. I'm talking about personal data, social etiquette, communication skills, collaboration. These are the key things that we can be working towards. I often say to people, you wouldn't give a car to someone who couldn't drive, right? And yet, far too often, we're seeing that the social responsibility to provide opportunities for little people to use their devices responsibly as they engage with our tools is not embedded into the tool. So thinking about the position that what you build might have within the curriculum, and in fact even engaging specialist teachers in building that curriculum is something that can be done. And I'll just let this sit with you a little bit because this is a really great quote. It kind of relates to one of the big tensions in this space, which is screen time. I always push back on any discussion about screen time because to me there is no such thing as screen time. There are all different ways of using a screen. Some of them are very passive, some of them are highly engaging and interactive, and of course there's everything in between. And so if you can communicate that in your products and you can bring things to the table with an articulation of why they're creative and how they actually offer experiences to the students that they can't get in any other way, then that's an asset. So these are the three kinds of golden rules that I talk to particularly parents about when they talk about screen time and what apps have value and how they should use mobile devices. So the first one is always ask your children to teach you what they know. And when you're testing your products, if you actually can't have students at the end of that time articulate what it is that they're learning through using that product, then that's an opportunity for you to do more work in that space. Because really understanding and being able to reflect on what it is that they're doing is critically important for adoption. I always talk to parents about seeking out opportunities to play and learn together with their kids. So anything that you make that really makes clear the idea that yes, you can do this in isolation or independently, that's okay, but there are actually collaborative ways of using this tool and ways of bringing people together. That's going to be a pro for you. And the third one is that students should always be able to choose apps that allow them to create. So whenever you're producing something that's open-ended, and for students something that allows them to have a different experience every time they engage with the tool, then once again that's in the right direction for adoption from the education community. If every student is following directions and producing the same thing, that's not learning, that's a recipe. And that's a real problem in our space for adoption. So in finishing up here, there are 4 key things that teachers identify when they're selecting tools that they'll use in their classroom. The first one is that it's future-oriented. So the future for kids in the classroom is now through to the next 20 years. You know, we're talking about students coming into a space in pre-prep where we're preparing them for jobs that don't exist yet. Everyone knows that's hard stuff. So if we do what's best for them now with a thought about the future, we're probably doing the best thing we can at this point. The second thing that they're looking for is always engagement. This is a word that has been coming up for the last 12 years particularly, and it's really related to the idea that there are challenges in connecting the kids to the curriculum. In other words, kids now will not do something just because they're told that it is good for them. They actually have to be directed to spaces where they can make authentic connections for themselves to find engagement, to be motivated. So for teachers, things that really connect students to the content and curriculum are key. The third thing is that skill improves and is measurable in its improvement. And I've alluded to that across a whole bunch of the topics that I've talked about. But teachers are under the pump to actually be able to show in a concrete way what they're doing for our students and how that's playing out as they track up, hopefully track up. The fourth one is that it increases collaboration and communication. And I don't know why those are lumped together so often by teachers, but it sounds like a good deal to me. Because when you're actually collaborating, it's almost impossible to do that without communicating, and vice versa. So I think it is a nice way to kind of experience that, that thinking process. So I hope that's given you like a kind of full throttle, this is what we're thinking about in classrooms and education all the time. As I said, there was a lot of data there. So the Horizon report is your go-to. And if you would like more of the research and studies that I've been using there, just flick me an email. You can find me at Cathy at iPad Art Room. It's Cathy with a C. And thanks so much for being such a 3 o'clock Friday audience. That was awesome. You turned up. Please. I've left 10 minutes for that.
So, serious one, like, how much do you think it matters that kids don't have to learn as much around spelling and handwriting and how to find information in the ways we used to before? Like, does it matter too much that they're not going to have the same handwriting as they might have 30 years ago and they're not going to learn as
So there are factions on this, and it's a constant tension, like right down to the staff room level with teachers. I personally don't believe that the same pathway that we used to teach reading, writing and arithmetic is useful. That doesn't mean that I don't think the same level of skill will and should be developed. So in other words, perhaps we're not doing the same exercises at the same key stages. Perhaps we're hitting it in different directions. But you know, I will see students that are 10 years old who have literally developed different thumb muscles and can text at 1,000,000 miles an hour and link images to words to create meaning, like with memes or what have you, in ways that I could never have asked young people to do 10 years ago of the same age. So our understanding of literacy has expanded. There are more ways of communicating that our students have access to now that we need to unpack. So for example, I doubt very much that in 20 years any of our kids are going to be applying, you know, with a resume that's in text. Most of the time they're going to be doing something else that's going to be folio based, that's going to be a whole variety of media mashed up together. And so in terms of even just plain and simple time, how do you put all of that new stuff in without some of the old stuff going out? And I think if we stop thinking about classrooms as static programming and more about living, breathing organisms that have to be responsive to our world and to the people in it, we're probably on the right track. But as far as hard and fast answers, I don't know, like our kids don't have the vocabulary that they used to, absolutely don't. And so that's an interesting thing. But their vocabulary is hugely increased in their ability to unpack a video and to talk about how the subtext might be something that's affecting your emotional response to film. You know, to be able to produce, you know, in new media what they can now, when, you know, it was hard pressed to get a kid to take a photograph 15 years ago that, you know, was framed correctly is an interesting thing. It's a brave new world.
How do you see with the study curriculum, like software, there's so different level of the quality of software. And,
Yep.
does the Australian curriculum play a role in that?
Yeah. So the Australian curriculum is putting out their own resources, which is a game changer. So Scoodle is the avenue that they're using for that. So if you want to investigate that, that's where it's coming out of. And as you say, the quality is hugely variant. Yeah. And so it's all a work in progress. We're up to like the 8th revision on the Australian curriculum in some subjects. It's just a huge change for us nationally. So can't tell exactly what's going to happen with it. But definitely opportunities for people to build things that sit within it. And the idea that there are opportunities for tools to nest into the different subject areas is a huge one now that all teachers are being charged with that role of being an ICT leader. Because that's brand new. Like there are some art teachers, science teachers, maths teachers that were never using technology and now need to, have to. It's mandated. Finally. Yeah.
So are they going to introduce some kind of certification or what's the...
No. No. Yeah, so the challenge becomes like if you want to get your products and things out there, how do you do that with your teachers? And so you've got to find the people that are going to be the good evangelists for you, the testers. Teachers just love free stuff. I got to tell you, like, that's the biggest win for you is that they're paid rubbish money for the job that they do. So if you give them something, they'll try it out and they'll tell you, you know, if they think it's useful, I want 40 of these. And then you're onto something. And they'll tell you 12 other teacher friends who are just desperate to get their dirty little hands on it. So it's, yeah, well, you know all about it. She's got boxes of jars and pins and toilet rolls. Yeah, imagine what she'd do if you gave her free apps. It'd be nuts. It's true, right? That's the thing, is connecting with the right people. So if you're into Twitter, the hashtag of AussieEd has really social teachers on it all the time. You watch, you see who's talking about maths or science. I'm going to hit you up to help me out.
You touched briefly on automation. Like, because my wife and I see most other teachers all spend a lot of time checking results and planning.
Yeah.
With the result, you have to store each individual student's information somewhere, and then the security comes in.
Yeah, so most schools have an LMS that they work with. That's just the way that that's panned out. But things that work within the classroom space are kind of different. And that's what I was alluding to with the disconnect between the personal in-class day-to-day data that's happening and then the way that the big data on the students and then, you know, the ecosystem of the school and even MOOCs and things that sit within the curriculum are all nested together. There's no, at the moment, there's not a lot of solutions that work between those spaces.
Basically an awful mess to use. I can't see how someone actually proved that, but other can cost. The user interface seems to be like a DOS 3.1 thing.
At best, at times, yeah. That would be a good day. Yeah, sometimes I'm waiting for a green flash to just be, yeah. Yeah, welcome to my world. Yeah. Slowly. But the thing is, there are other priorities as well, right? So getting the devices in the hands of the students is the priority. So to, you know, go through a huge migration, you know, on site of things that actually still don't impact on the teaching of learning is hard to sell. You know, it's much easier to sell to your community. We're giving all of the kids Chromebooks this week because they have no access in a one-to-one environment at our school than it is to go, well, we actually need to change our LMS. So, and again, that puts pressure on the teachers and stuff, right? Oh, sorry, learning management system. Yeah. So that's something that puts pressure on the teachers because they're like, this thing's heinous and I have to use it every day. But it looks much better to put a device in the hands of every kid. And then the problem with not spending on the professional learning to use it. Yeah.
I was at a talk yesterday by Elaine.
Mm-hmm. Was it coding?
Yeah, about
Awesome.
teaching kids coding, and it's like a kind of a personal crusade for her.
It is.
She said when she joined Microsoft, she negotiated that 25% of her time be dedicated to this cause.
Yeah.
My question is kind of, if you had a lot of developers in Australia that were able to negotiate with their employer to, you know, contribute some of their time towards some of your problems, what kind of things would you see them solve?
It's a good question. Before I answer that, the coding thing, I purposefully didn't mention it today because coding has got the best press possible. And I think it's a wonderful thing, but like that's something that's charging forward again in schools in Australia, not necessarily the same way worldwide, but it's really going forward in Australia. And Apple's right about to build out the Swift Playground, so that's in beta at the moment, which will mean that all students can use the same code that developers are using, you know, from 4 years old, which is really amazing. So that's coming, and those spaces are really nice. But lots of other people have got great products to interact with as well. So you can kind of use that as a model for what you're talking about, because you can kind of go, well, this is where it's happening in terms of support for teachers and learners really well. And if you think about taking the kind of mindset that's happened with coding, from the marketing of it to the linking to the curriculum, to the getting the teachers on board, to the having the discussions with school, and of course then the resourcing it, not just with the product, but with all of the information behind it and the programs for professional learning behind it, then that's a winner. Minecraft did it very well, but nowhere near as well as just coding as a thing has done it through kind of osmosis. So any time that developers spend in education, you know, is time well spent. There are spaces at the moment to make a big dent. But just understanding that, you know, the Pokemon thing, for example, massive craze in the same way, of course, that yo-yos or marbles and things, you know, were. But in terms of education, when something's that big, we're going to use it in the classroom. Because every teacher's going, well, if our kids love that thing so much, then we need to find a way to use it in the classroom. So what do? They don't give all of their kids devices and say, go and use Pokemon Go. They develop curriculum that matches the Pokemon Go so that they can justify using it in the classroom because they know it's engaging the students. Yeah, so that's the mindset all the time, is trying to leverage whatever's working in the real world and bring it back to the kids. And if you're going to develop from the ground up with an idea, you're going to have to try and reverse engineer that process. You're going to have to try and underpin it, sell it to the teachers on that idea that it has that quality to it, give them the curriculum and the learning to support it, and then blow it up. So it has to be nested like that. Anything else? You look like you don't want to go. I don't know. I feel like maybe you just want to go to sleep in here now. Could turn the lights down for you. Thanks so much, you guys.